Canada just signed a 20-year gas export deal with Germany, and the number that should give investors pause is not the deal size, it is the gap between what was signed and what is actually needed to build anything. The Ksi Lisims terminal in northern British Columbia has a nameplate capacity of 12 million metric tons per year. As of today, buyers have committed to 5 million of those tons. Shell holds 2 million. Total Energies holds another 2 million. Cefe, the German state-backed buyer that signed this week, adds 1 million more. Project backers have consistently said they need roughly 10 million tons contracted before they will approve construction. The project is at 42% of that threshold. What broke the session's surface, though, was not the tonnage math, it was what Cefe actually agreed to buy. The German buyer is not receiving gas that sails from British Columbia to Hamburg. Cefe will take delivery at the BC terminal under a free on-board arrangement, meaning they take ownership the moment the cargo is loaded, and then trade Pacific Basin cargoes to buyers in Asia, while sourcing Atlantic origin gas to fulfill German demand. The gas credited to this deal does not travel to Germany. It satisfies a German portfolio position through a commodity swap. The reason is straightforward. Panama Canal congestion has made direct BC to Europe routing expensive and unreliable. The Africa and South America long route adds days and cost. The economics of a physical shipment from Ksi Lisims to a German regasification terminal simply do not close without a premium that buyers are not offering. So the deal is real, the contract is binding, the revenue to the project is genuine, but the energy security framing that ran through nearly every headline today rests on accounting, not on a new molecule moving between Canada and Europe. The same day the deal was announced, Stephen Gilbell, a former environment minister, resigned from the Liberal caucus. He cited a list of climate policy reversals: the consumer carbon price removal, the zero-emission vehicle standard rollback, the suspended oil sands emissions cap, the suspended clean electricity regulations for Alberta. Prime Minister Carney, asked directly whether the Alberta Energy Pact was worth Gilbell leaving, answered absolutely. That answer tells investors something about how much political capital Carney has now staked on the LNG build. It does not tell them whether the capital will be enough to close the remaining 5 million tons. The Ksi Lisims deal is being read through two separate premises, and both are present in the market today. The first premise: FID will arrive in months, construction begins shortly after, and gas flows in the early 2030s, making today's contract a near-term catalyst for Canadian LNG adjacent names. The second premise: FID requires approximately 10 million tons. Only 5 million are contracted. No fourth buyer has been announced, and 2 pending court challenges mean approvals are not final. On the second reading, today is not a catalyst. It is progress on a path that still has more than half its distance uncovered. The swap mechanism sharpens this divide rather than bridging it. Investors holding the first premise are pricing Canadian energy export diversification away from the United States, a geopolitical trade that gained momentum as Trump tariff pressure mounted through the first half of 2026. That trade is not wrong on its face. Canada does have 12 million tons of terminal capacity planned. The government has now committed political capital explicitly, at the cost of a cabinet resignation. The project is not hypothetical. But the investor holding this second premise asks a specific question: who buys the next 5 million tons? Shell and Total Energies signed early, when global LNG demand forecasts were uniformly bullish. Cefe signed under political pressure from Berlin, which needed to demonstrate energy supply chain diversification after years of Russian gas dependence. The next buyer has no equivalent political urgency. They are a commercial off-taker making a 20-year volume commitment at a price that competes with Australian LNG, U.S. Gulf Coast terminals, and Qatari expansion capacity, all of which are also seeking long-term buyers for the same delivery window. There is a precedent for how this gap plays out in British Columbia. LNG Canada, the Shell-led terminal at Kitimat, moved through years of offtake negotiations and multiple announced milestones before its final investment decision in 2018. The first gas from that project is targeted for 2025. The timeline between buyers announced and construction approved was not months. It was a cycle of commercial renegotiation, financing alignment, and regulatory clearance that ran longer than initial guidance suggested. Ksi Lisims backers are not LNG Canada. The projects differ in size, ownership, and political context, but the mechanism of the gap, offtake secured to point of confidence, then stalled while the last increment of volume is assembled, is familiar. The unstated premise that separates the two readings is this: the pro-deal frame requires that the political and commercial momentum from the first 5 million tons will compress the negotiating timeline for the next 5 million. The skeptical frame requires no such compression. It treats each increment as independently negotiated with no spillover urgency from prior signatories. Neither premise is derivable from today's announcement alone. The unresolved question from the contract announcement is not whether Ksi Lisims gets built. It is whether the FID arrives before the political and commercial window that created today's buyer alignment begins to close. That window has a specific shape: the Ukraine conflict maintaining European demand urgency, the Trump tariff environment maintaining Canadian diversification urgency, and no resolution to either by the time a fourth major offtake buyer needs to commit. The 5 million ton gap is not symmetric on both sides of that window. If a fourth buyer signs in 2026, the FID timeline holds, and the early 2030s delivery date remains achievable. Energy names with Ksi Lisims exposure, including producers supplying feedstock gas into the North Coast corridor, reprice to reflect a confirmed construction commitment. The political cost of the Gilbo resignation becomes the price Carney paid to unlock a decade of export revenue. The LNG Canada precedent becomes an analog that ends positively. If no fourth buyer is announced by the time the current geopolitical urgency fades, specifically if the Ukraine conflict moves toward a settlement that reduces European emergency demand, or if competing LNG supply from the U.S. Gulf Coast or Qatar absorbs the uncommitted buyer pool, the 5 million ton shortfall becomes harder to close at commercial terms. Project developers would face the choice of accepting a longer pre-FID period or repricing offtake contracts to attract buyers. The North Coast transmission line, which still needs to be financed and constructed as a precondition of the terminal, adds another approval and financing layer that extends the path. The verification point for investors is specific and trackable. Does a fourth major offtake signing, bringing contracted volumes to or past 8 million tons per year, occur before end of 2026? 8 million tons would not reach the stated 10 million ton FID threshold, but it would shift the probability structure by demonstrating buyer momentum beyond the political signatories. The absence of a fourth signing by year-end would confirm that the swap-framed CFI deal did not unlock a new commercial wave, only extended an existing political one. Ksi Lisims leans toward FID on a 2027 timeline if the offtake gap narrows this year. It leans toward delay if the current buyer pool proves complete for the medium term. The contract announced today is genuine progress. The question it leaves open, whether 5 million tons generates commercial gravity toward 10 million, or whether the remaining gap requires a different political moment to close, is the one that matters for positioning, and it will not be answered by the announcement itself. Every day after the close, we publish a market wrap and key issue analysis. Subscribe to the channel.